December 1942, skies over Guadalcanal. An American pilot dives straight down at full throttle. Behind him, a Japanese Zero follows. Both planes scream toward the ocean. The American pulls up hard. His plane shakes but holds together. The Zero tries the same move. Its wings flutter. Metal screams. Then the plane breaks apart in mid-air. The Zero was the most feared fighter in the Pacific. It could outturn and outmaneuver anything in the sky, but it had a fatal weakness that its own pilots hated. This is the story of how the Zero's greatest strength became its deadliest flaw. Let's rewind to 1940. The world doesn't know it yet, but Japan has just created something extraordinary, something that will redefine what fighter aircraft can do. The Mitsubishi A6M0 enters service in absolute secrecy. When it first appears over China in late 1940, Chinese pilots report an aircraft so maneuverable, so fast, so far-ranging that their commanders don't believe them. They think these pilots are making excuses for poor performance. The reports sound impossible. They weren't impossible. They were just encountering the Zero for the first time. When December 7th, 1941 arrives, the Zero announces itself to the world in thunder and fire. Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore. Everywhere Japanese forces strike, the Zero establishes absolute air superiority. Allied pilots who survive encounters speak in hushed, almost reverent tones about an aircraft that can outturn, outclimb, and outrange anything they're flying. American Wildcats and British Hurricanes might as well be flying tractors by comparison. The Zero can execute turns that would stall any Western fighter. It can climb to altitudes where Allied planes gasp for air. And perhaps most terrifyingly, it has a combat radius that seems to defy the laws of physics, appearing hundreds of miles from the nearest Japanese base when conventional wisdom says it should be impossible. For 18 months, the Zero is untouchable. It's the apex predator of Pacific skies. Allied pilots develop a simple survival rule. If you see a Zero, run. Don't engage. Don't try to fight. Just run. But every legend has its shadow, and the Zero's shadow was darker than anyone could have imagined. To understand the Zero's weakness, we first need to understand its genius. Because, make no mistake, the Zero was a masterpiece of engineering optimization. Chief designer Jiro Horikoshi faced an impossible challenge. The Imperial Japanese Navy demanded a fighter that could escort bombers over China, flying distances that no fighter had ever achieved. They wanted it to outmaneuver anything in the sky. They wanted speed, climb rate, and range. And they wanted it with a relatively modest engine, because Japan didn't have access to the powerful engines American manufacturers could produce. Horikoshi's solution was elegant and ruthless. Strip away everything that isn't absolutely essential. Make the airframe as light as physically possible. The Zero weighed just 3,700 pounds empty. Compare that to an American Wildcat at 5,800 pounds. That's a difference of over 2,000 pounds, nearly the weight of a small car. Every rivet was scrutinized. Every component was examined for weight savings. The result was an aircraft so light, so aerodynamically clean, that it could perform maneuvers that seemed to violate physics. Pilots who flew the Zero described it as an extension of their body. The controls were feather-light. The plane responded to thought as much as touch. In a dogfight, a skilled Zero pilot could put his aircraft into positions that Allied pilots couldn't even comprehend. Vertical loops, rolling scissors, high-speed yo-yo maneuvers. The Zero excelled at all of them. Saburo Sakai, Japan's legendary ace with 64 confirmed kills, called it the finest aircraft he ever flew. He described how the Zero allowed him to fight multiple opponents simultaneously, using superior maneuverability to control the geometry of combat. In his hands, The Zero wasn't just an airplane. It was an instrument of aerial dominance. But that lightness, that beautiful, deadly lightness, came at a price that Japanese pilots would pay in blood. But here's the problem. The terrible truth that Japanese pilots discovered in combat. You can't cheat physics. Everything in engineering is a trade-off. And the Zero's designers had made a choice that seemed reasonable in 1940 but became catastrophic by 1942. To achieve that miraculous weight reduction, the Zero had no armor plating protecting the pilot. None. The fuel tanks, stretched throughout the wings to provide that legendary range, had no self-sealing capability. When bullets struck those tanks, they didn't seal. They leaked. Or worse, they exploded. The Zero was essentially a flying Molotov cocktail wrapped around a completely unprotected human being. American pilots who shot down Zeros described something horrifying. The planes didn't just go down, they disintegrated. A short burst from a .50 caliber machine gun and the Zero would erupt in flames. The aluminum skin was so thin that bullets passed through it like paper. The structural components were so lightweight that sustained stress could cause catastrophic failure. Japanese ace Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, one of the highest-scoring aces of the war, wrote candidly about the terror of flying the Zero in a letter to his sister. "Every time I climb into the cockpit, I wonder if this will be the day a single bullet finds me. We have no protection. We are samurai riding into battle on horses made of paper." Another pilot described the moment he realized the truth during a mission over New Guinea. A P-38 Lightning made a single pass, firing a brief burst. The Zero ahead of him simply came apart. The wings folded backward, the fuselage broke in half, and the pilot, still alive, tumbled through the air without a parachute because most Zero pilots didn't wear them to save weight. The psychological impact was devastating. Pilots knew they flew a glass cannon. One hit could be fatal. There was no margin for error, no second chances, no protection if they made a mistake or got unlucky. The Americans figured it out faster than anyone expected. By mid-1942, a new set of tactics emerged, specifically designed to exploit the Zero's weakness. Lieutenant Commander John "Jimmy" Thatch watched his squadron mates die in early 1942. He analyzed combat reports obsessively, looking for patterns, searching for the Zero's Achilles heel. And he found it. The Zero was unbeatable in a turning fight, but it had weaknesses in high-speed maneuvers and diving attacks. Its lightweight construction meant it couldn't handle sustained high G-forces. Its controls became heavy at high speeds. And crucially, American planes like the Wildcat and later the Hellcat had something the Zero didn't: ruggedness. They could take punishment and keep flying. Thatch developed what became known as the Thatch Weave, a defensive scissors maneuver where two American fighters worked as a team. When a Zero attacked one plane, the other would cross paths, bringing guns to bear on the attacker. The Zero pilot faced an impossible choice: break off the attack or face fire from the wingman. But the real killer tactic was simpler: boom and zoom. American pilots learned to never dogfight a Zero. Instead, they used superior diving speed and energy retention to make slashing attacks. Dive from above, fire a burst, keep diving through, use speed to climb back to altitude, repeat. The Zero couldn't follow. Its lightweight structure suffered from compression issues in high-speed dives. Pilots reported control flutter and structural failure when diving at speeds American planes handled routinely. Multiple Zeros were lost when pilots attempted to follow diving American aircraft, and the planes simply broke apart from aerodynamic stress. The turning point came at Guadalcanal. In 6 months of brutal air combat, American pilots transformed from terrified prey to confident hunters. The Zero's kill-loss ratio, once staggeringly in Japan's favor, began to reverse. By 1943, being a Zero pilot had gone from being an elite warrior to being a statistical death sentence. For Japanese pilots, the evolution of air combat in the Pacific War became a psychological nightmare that was perhaps as destructive as the physical danger itself. By 1943, the effects on morale became impossible to hide. Japanese pilot memoirs and intercepted diaries reveal a growing sense of doom. Unlike early in the war, when pilots wrote home about their invincible fighter, now they wrote goodbye letters before routine missions. Ensign Kiyoshi Ito wrote in his diary, "10 of us left the carrier this morning. 5 came back. Tomorrow maybe 3 will return. We know the mathematics of our fate. The Zero was built for a short war, and we are dying in a long one." The tactical situation became untenable. Japanese doctrine had always emphasized offensive action, the aggressive pursuit of the enemy, the willingness to die for the emperor. These principles worked beautifully in 1941 when Japanese pilots had superior training and equipment, but by 1943 they were facing better pilots in better planes, and the Zero's fragility meant defensive tactics simply didn't exist. There was no fall back and defend option. A Zero couldn't absorb damage and limp home. It couldn't take a hit and keep fighting. Every engagement had to be offensive because the alternative was certain death. This forced Zero pilots into ever more desperate attacks, which resulted in ever more catastrophic losses. The cultural dimension of this crisis was profound. The Japanese military was steeped in Bushido, the warrior code that emphasized honor, duty, and fearlessness in the face of death. Pilots were expected to embrace the possibility of dying for Japan. They were told that their Zero was the embodiment of Japanese spirit, superior because of its purity and simplicity, not despite it. But there's a difference between accepting death and flying what amounts to a suicide mission every single time you take off. The Zero's lack of protection wasn't seen as a design flaw by Japanese command. It was seen as an expression of fighting spirit. The idea was that armor and self-sealing tanks were Western crutches, signs of weakness. A true samurai didn't need protection. Try explaining that philosophy to a 19-year-old pilot watching his wingman burn to death because a single American bullet found his fuel tank. The attrition became unsustainable. Japan had started the war with the world's best-trained naval pilots. These men had thousands of hours of flight time and years of combat experience. By 1944, most of them were dead, and the Zero had contributed to that loss in a way that went beyond simple combat statistics. The plane killed experienced pilots at a rate that made it impossible to train replacements effectively. The new pilots, teenagers with minimal training, were sent into combat in the same vulnerable aircraft their predecessors had flown, but they lacked the skill to maximize the Zero's advantages while minimizing its weaknesses. The result was slaughter on a scale that's difficult to comprehend. At Philippine Sea, some Japanese pilots were shot down before they even realized they were under attack. By late 1944, the Zero had become synonymous with death. When Japan began organizing kamikaze units, deliberately crashing planes into American ships, it wasn't an entirely new concept for Zero pilots. Many of them had been flying what felt like suicide missions for months already. Warrant Officer Fumio Tatsuguchi, who flew in the late war period, wrote a letter that was found after his death. "They tell us the Zero is a symbol of Japanese spirit. Perhaps they're right, but not in the way they mean. It's beautiful, deadly, and burns easily, just like us." The tragedy is that Japanese engineers knew how to fix the Zero's problems. They designed improved versions with armor, self-sealing tanks, and stronger airframes. But by the time these improved models entered production, Japan's industrial capacity had been crippled by American bombing. The factories that could have produced better Zeros were being destroyed faster than they could build them. So pilots kept flying the original fragile Zero right up until the end of the war. They climbed into their cockpits, knowing exactly how vulnerable they were. And they flew anyway, because that's what duty demanded. It's one of the war's bitter ironies. The plane that had given Japanese pilots such confidence in 1941 had become a source of quiet terror by 1945. Today, the Zero occupies a strange space in aviation history. It's simultaneously iconic and cautionary, brilliant and flawed, a testament to engineering ingenuity and a reminder of design compromises taken too far. In museum hangars around the world, restored Zeros gleam under spotlights. Collectors pay millions for airworthy examples. Airshow crowds watch in awe as these graceful machines demonstrate the maneuverability that once ruled Pacific skies. The clean lines, the elegant engineering, the sheer beauty of the design, it's undeniable. But scratch beneath the surface, and you find the lessons learned in blood. The Zero taught aircraft designers around the world that performance alone isn't enough. Survivability matters. Pilot protection matters. The ability to sustain damage and continue fighting matters. Post-war American fighter design reflected these lessons. The F-86 Sabre, the F-4 Phantom, even modern jets like the F-16 and F-35, they all incorporated hard-won knowledge, armor for critical systems, redundancy in control systems, pilot ejection seats, self-sealing fuel systems. These weren't luxuries, they were necessities proven by the Zero's weakness. Japanese engineers learned the lesson too, though it came too late for the thousands of pilots who died. Late-war variants of the Zero attempted to add armor and self-sealing tanks, but these modifications negated the weight advantages that made the Zero special in the first place. The improved versions were heavier, slower, less maneuverable, just another fighter among many, no longer exceptional. The Zero's paradox remains fascinating. It was simultaneously ahead of its time and fatally behind it. Ahead in aerodynamics, maneuverability, and range. Behind in understanding that modern air combat demanded survivability as much as performance. Perhaps the most fitting tribute to the Zero comes from its former enemies. American pilots who fought against it speak with genuine respect for its capabilities and genuine sympathy for the men who flew it. They recognized skill when they saw it. They understood that Japanese pilots weren't defeated by lack of courage or ability. They were defeated by an aircraft that demanded perfection and offered no protection when perfection failed. The Zero ruled the skies in early 1942. It was faster, more agile, and more feared than any Allied fighter. But to achieve that performance, Japanese engineers stripped away armor and protection. They made the plane light enough to dominate in dogfights, but fragile enough to break apart under stress. The same design that made it legendary also made it deadly to the pilots who flew it. If you want more untold stories from aviation history, hit that subscribe button. We've got plenty more where this came from. Thanks for watching.